It's far less Blade Runner cyberpunk and much more Moulin Rouge or Babylon. I saw an early viewing of Megalopolis, and as I walked out of the theater, I said, "Oh, I gotta sleep on it." It was epic.
Half of the theater did.
Yeah, half the theater was asleep. I made it through. So I needed some time to digest this movie. It's a lot. It's a lot to take in. I had known about this movie for a long time. He originally wrote it in the 90s, wrote a treatment of the story in the 90s, and it had always been hanging out there in the same way that like Kubrick's Napoleon was there, and I don't know, Tarantino's Star Trek or something. Just these things that are mythology in Hollywood. And this one actually came to life because he put up his part of his vineyard to self-produce this, finally got a distributor, Lionsgate. Those of you that follow me have seen the whole thing kind of play out over the last 6 months. My initial understanding of how this was going to be is that it was going to be much more cyberpunk, future alternative universe of New York, or New Rome, as they call it. It was mildly cyberpunk. It touched the surface of the genre, but never really dived into it. It's fantasy, or as he says, a fable. It's definitely based on classicism. For those of you who study Greek and Roman history, or even mythology of those cultures and Carthaginian relationship with Rome, there's a lot of allegory there, even seeping into modern times as well. So the Shia LaBeouf character, for example, is simultaneously Mark Antony of Rome and Benito Mussolini, right? I mean, there's various things like that characters are synthesized from history into one portrayed on screen. Now, Nathalie Emmanuel is great in this. I didn't know she was going to be the lead as much as she's the lead. She carries this film pretty much, along with Adam Driver, who are both great. They're fantastic. The acting in this is fantastic. The costumes are fantastic in this, in the truest of Italian ways. The set design is amazing. The effects are great. The story is there, but it's not articulated. And this is something that Coppola has a problem with sometimes. Francis Ford Coppola is an amazing director. Godfather 2 is the second greatest movie ever, in my opinion. Godfather 1 is top 5. But he has a lot of things that miss over the years. Many films who most moviegoers wouldn't know the names of. Some of the other great films that he's done, The Conversation, Apocalypse Now, Dracula, Tetro, those are movies that you can rewatch multiple times over the years. Then there are films like Jack, which I wish I had never seen because it's so terrible. I would put Megalopolis somewhere in between Bram Stoker's Dracula and Apocalypse Now. I love Apocalypse Now. It's based off of my favorite book ever, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. But again, there is something not articulated in the film of Apocalypse Now that's articulated in Heart of Darkness. Or even Citizen Kane, which is also an adaptation of Heart of Darkness in its own way. Bram Stoker's Dracula, another adaptation, also misses the mark to some degree, but is a good film and worth watching. Gary Oldman in that is amazing. Even Keanu is pretty good in it. Those are both flawed films in Coppola's tier ranking. Apocalypse Now and Dracula. Megalopolis is in there somewhere, not sandwiched, because I think it sits uncomfortably in between those two films with a great, if not vast, distance between their quality. Apocalypse Now is far superior to Megalopolis, but Megalopolis is far superior to Dracula. So in a tier ranking of Coppola films, there's not equal distance between the distribution of the ordinal rankings of his films. And I think the same thing could be said of his buddies, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, both of whom have fantastic, unmatched movies in their genres and have some really big misses, such as Lucas's Howard the Duck or Red Tails. Megalopolis, unfortunately, I think is a missed opportunity. When I know his process and how he analyzes scenes before he shoots them, he probably over-edited and over-revised in his mind before they even shot. Something very different than shooting everything that you think and then going back and editing from there. Two different filmmaking processes, and I think the amount of time it took for him to get this movie made might have been the major downfall right there. Now, the Coppola family has 2 kids. Roman and Sofia are filmmakers in their own right. And all 3 of them take giant risk in their filmmaking. And sometimes it hits and sometimes it doesn't. Bring in Sofia and Roman's filmography into this as well, just to gauge where I think this film stands, Roman Coppola's film CQ is masterful in compared to Megalopolis. He plays with fantasy in the same type of way as his dad does, but it's a far superior film. Go watch CQ. It's great. Or CQ, depending on how you pronounce it. And that has a double meaning. Watch the film and you'll see what I'm saying. Lost in Translation, Sofia's greatest film, far superior than Megalopolis. And that's a subdued minimalist film, which is way better than Megalopolis. And that tells you right there what's missing. How could Francis spend so much money on this movie and it not be as good as his daughter's minimalist film, Lost in Translation? And the reason why is because story. He overemphasizes characterization in this film without putting them together in a cohesive, clearly articulated and illustrated story of how those characters actually work together. We have a Cicero character and a bunch of other Roman elites that if you know classicism of Rome, you'll get it. But the average American or the average Westerner or the average viewer of this movie will not. It's not to say that when you go to the cinema, you expect good storytelling. Characterization alone is not enough. Great production design is not enough. A great soundtrack is not enough. Great costumes. This film might be only rivaled by The Untouchables, where Armani made every single costume himself, or maybe even Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette. In this sense, Coppola missed creating the dynamics between great characterization and story. The Godfather is amazing because of its characterization and how those characters come together in a story that we are following along at every step. Even Godfather 2, which switches back and forth in timelines, we still understand everything that's going on in that story. And we still love all the characters depicted on screen for their own purposes that fulfill that story. Megalopolis had zero of that connection between story and character. And that's the downfall of this film, which should have been some type of magnum opus. In the same way AI should have been a magnum opus for Kubrick, but he died and Spielberg took it on and it became Spielberg junk after that. In any event, one should applaud Coppola for the risk that he took in this, putting up his own money, putting his money where his mouth is, and not really giving a shit about what the critics have to say. And I applaud him for that. It's just not what I expected it to be in terms of what it will mean for the history of film. Am I going to watch it over and over again? Probably. This is probably a film I'll watch every year and a half just to see if I can glean something else out of it. The thing is chock full with symbolism. There's symbolism in everything, in every frame and every piece of dialogue, but it will take years to unpack this, and it's not something that's very relatable. It's far less Blade Runner cyberpunk and much more Moulin Rouge or Babylon. Okay, so Ben Solo is Octavian or Caesar Augustus. John Voight is Julius Caesar, who gets betrayed by Shia, crazy LaBeouf, Mark Antony, and his psycho bitch wife, Cleopatra, who is the funny girl from the funny movies. And the hot chick from Game of Thrones, Mocha Hotness, is Julius Caesar reincarnated, because history is just a circle of life. She gives birth to Lady Liberty, which is why the baby at the end of the movie raises her hand up like a torch. In other words, history repeats itself, and don't fall like Rome did America. That's Coppola's last lesson that he has to bestow on the cinematic world.